Welcome back to Not Your Forte, a music education podcast for music education students to help you survive and thrive throughout your undergrad. I'm Eric Tinkler, a fourth-year music education student here at Kansas State University. As always, I'm joined by Dr. Philip Payne, the Music Education Division Chair at K-State. A lot of words right there. And we're going to continue on our Conducting Bootcamp series. We have our penultimate episode this week. We're going to be talking about leadership from the podium, establishing a positive culture. Before we kind of dive into this, thank you so much to everyone who's been listening or watching on YouTube. It's been super fun to go through this series and just dive into all different aspects of conducting. As always, just make sure you take some time. You rate, you like, you share, you do all those really good things. Help us continue to grow, because this is such a fun adventure that Dr. Payne and I have the opportunity to be able to share with you guys and be able to share these insights from these awesome and great educators. But anyways, we're going to go ahead. Let's introduce our guests. Diane, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Diane Koutsulis, and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. And of course, we do have schools here. So I taught middle school band in Illinois for 3 years before I went to my graduate degree at LSU. And then I've been in Las Vegas ever since. So I taught for 9 years at Las Vegas High School, which was at that time the original Las Vegas High School, so the inner city school. And I was lucky enough to open up Green Valley High School and taught there for 26 years before I retired. And now I do consulting with districts and conduct and adjudicate and just have a great time.
That's starting off. What got you out to Las Vegas of all places? I'm sure that's a fun place to have taught.
You know, I know it's hard to imagine, but in the early 80s, before all of you were born, in Illinois, they were having a real problem with the tax base. So they were starting to cut music programs in schools. And honestly, we could have a whole discussion about why that doesn't really save you any money. But I decided to go to graduate school and ended up at LSU, like I said, and didn't feel like I could go back to Illinois. I didn't feel like that was really the place where I wanted to go. And I heard that there were some jobs open out west in Vegas, and that the school district was really growing. And I thought, I'll just go out there for a year or 2 or 3, and just never left. So just to give you an idea really quick, when I got to Vegas, there were 345,000 people in our county. And now there's well over 2 million. So there were 8 high schools, and now there's 42. You know what I mean? So I got to be here and watch this whole thing really grow. And so that was exciting.
So one of the things, what do you feel are the most important aspects of leadership that our listeners should focus on as they continue into their first years of teaching that will make them more effective from the podium?
Well, I think it's really important that we have specific goals on the podium that aren't necessarily music driven. And so, it begs the question, why do we do what we do? And I think some of the things that we want to teach, obviously we want our groups to sound great, and we want to make sure that we're teaching good playing skills, but there's so many other more important things that we're all about especially in ensemble work. And I think one of the first things that I think we have to talk about is teaching excellence. And so I want my students to have a sense of excellence in everything that they do. And I think we can start to instill that from the podium and not accept things that aren't good enough. And I'm just going to tell this story really, really quickly. And I'm a bit of a storyteller, so if this gets to be too much, just, give me a sign.
I'll go right ahead.
But when I started at Vegas High 100 years ago, I had 29 students, and the program had been decimated, years and years of neglect, and of maybe an administration that didn't care as much, but just neglect from the teachers. And we had 29 kids. And when they hired me, they said, if you could just play the fight song and the Star Spangled Banner so that we can recognize it, we will give you anything you want. And I thought, well, that's just silly. We could do, that's just silly. So we worked really hard the first couple weeks, and I went to the administrator and I said, we were getting ready for an assembly. And I said, I really want to do a feature piece with the band. And he was like, oh, no, don't put the kids in that bad situation. It's been so bad and it'll just be embarrassing for everybody. I said, no, honestly, I think it's going to be fine. If we do this and it's a big mess, then let's just never do it again, but just, you have to trust me one time. And the reason I tell you this story is because we played the Star Spangled Banner, we played the fight song, and everybody was like, well, I recognize that. That was good. And it was time for our feature number. And, the kid gets up to the microphone and says, and now we're going to have our band playing a feature number first. And the whole assembly went silent because everybody expected it was going to be terrible. And we played the Go-Go's We Got the Beat. Okay, so it's really simple for those of you that don't remember that song. It goes bum 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 bum. So simple. But by the end of us playing that song, everybody was up, standing, and dancing. And so as much as we all want to play Maslenka and we want to play the Holst and we want to play everything great, we have to remember that no matter what we're playing, it's still important that we play with some sort of excellence. So that's my little story about excellence and teaching that. I think that's my first and foremost really important thing.
So we're going to be diving into kind of like culture building and stuff, especially a little bit later, but everything you're talking about excellence, talk a little bit more about how you just established that standard from the podium of what you expect.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to say that when we choose literature or whatever we're doing, whatever we're teaching, we want to make sure that the students have the ability to achieve that. And not only that, we want to make sure that if what we're trying to teach is a skill, we want to make sure that we have a plan for how the kids would achieve that. So it's really important that we don't just give them stuff to do. One of them. And knowing that, okay, if we play it and it's not exactly great, we need to keep working on it so that it could be better.
How would you describe your, so you talk about setting that excellence, you talk about the planning, the preparation. How would you describe your own leadership? So in other words, how would you describe yourself on the podium to be able to convey that? So for our listeners, describing what characteristics are most effective on being able to access that and make those personal connections with your own students.
Right. So I think it's really important that you know exactly what you're dealing with. And so we don't have to talk about that right this minute as far as, I have a thing about, teaching skills, and we would do a test every Monday and that. And so, and actually knowing how each student is doing, right? The thing you don't want to do on the podium is if something's not going the way you want it to go, I think the thing is to not berate people. And I'm going to say that I grew up in band at a time when, I'm going to tell you that I cried in band when I was a college student. That's ridiculous. And you're supposed to make music, so those days, I hope that those of us that grew up in that time have learned that that's not really the right way to do things. So I think the first most important thing is that we be prepared as educators, really know what we're doing. I'm always offended when people are on a podium and they really don't know the score and they don't really know what the problems are going to be, or, aren't ready to teach they're teaching. But also, there's some things that you can do from the podium, there's some things you can't. And I think you have to know the difference, and you have to be able to say to somebody, hey, could we just meet for a few minutes after school or during lunch and just go over that? And that way we're not working some things with an individual or a section in front of everybody and taking everybody's time. And so I think preparation is the most important thing. And then I think you also have to weigh what's important to fix right this minute. And I hate to use the word fix in music, but what do you want to work on right now? Or what do you think you can do in a smaller group setting?
So let's continue with just this aspect of talking about like your leadership style overall and everything, and talking about you grew up in an older band world, and the band world today has changed so much and so dramatically, and just in a lot of ways for the better. Can you talk about teaching, especially early on, and continue to develop as a teacher, as a female band director in this world that's
Right.
often male dominant?
So one of my mentors just passed away this last month, Frank Wickes. And I was one of his earliest graduate assistants. And we would have our conducting lessons, and he would pull me into his office and he would say, you know, I grew up in Ravelli's band, and you know, we just can't teach that way anymore. We just can't. And then I'd go into his rehearsal and he would scare me to death. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of times we could see that things weren't exactly the right way to do it, but we weren't sure of how to do it a different way. And I think we evolve as educators. And I'm going to say, quite honestly, my first few years on the podium, I think I wish I could take some of those things back. You know, I wish I could take some of those years back. And I think I would have been different. And I think we should never lose sight of the fact that, number one, we're teaching young people, and young people we make a huge impression on them. And what kind of impression do we want to make on them? We want to teach them to love music and to love working in a group and to love interacting with each other. Maybe the world would be better. And I think just pounding on them all the time is just really not the way to do it.
And I think that's a really great point for us to kind of dig into a little bit further, is that a lot of times with a positive culture, it's not always, I always say there's a difference between establishing a positive culture and what I tell our students as blowing smoke, where you just say, because a lot of times a student will go automatically to, oh, that was good, or great, now let's go to something else. And they use these descriptors, good, great, thinking that they're being positive, but they're reinforcing issues that are going to not be great on the back end. And so how do you draw that line between maintaining a positive culture, but still holding them to a certain level of accountability and excellence that we just started talking about at the very beginning of the podcast?
Right. So I think it's important to know that there's a difference between having a positive culture and just being a pushover. Do you know what I mean? So, like, for instance, in my band room, students weren't allowed to just walk into my office, right? They still had to knock and be asked to come in. There still has to be that sort of hierarchy in the organization. And they also need to know that if they haven't worked hard, it's probably not going to be good, like you said, or great. And so that effort has to be there. And there has to be a way for me to be able to discern if the effort's gone into it. And so I'm going to hear you play by yourself. Like, for people who say, well, you know, we want to have a positive culture, so we're not ever going to hear people play individually. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, I think that's ridiculous. You know, so I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Excellence. You still have to hold them to a higher standard. You don't need to call them names to do that, and you don't need to scare them to death, and you certainly don't need to make them cry to do that. But a positive culture doesn't mean that you're their best friend. A positive culture means that you respect what they're doing enough to treat them respectfully, and that you respect them enough to know that they're smart enough that they can do more than this.
And one of the ways that I tie into that exact sentiment also is that a lot of what we do in our rehearsal is going to translate to how they practice at home. So if we let things go at the rehearsal level, they are going to let things go when they go home and practice. And so a lot of this positive culture is also modeling exactly what we want them to do outside of our classroom as well as inside of the classroom.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And I'm going to say, sometimes we'll be working in rehearsal and I'll stop and I'll say, what are we doing right now? And they'll say, we're practicing. That's right. We're not rehearsing. We're practicing, because that's what we have to do right now. That's where we're at with our development.
And I think
that students need to know the difference between those two things.
And I think a really important thing that we kind of touched on earlier is, in order to establish this culture and have that high standard of excellence, is you need to be prepared as a conductor as well. If you're expecting your students to be prepared, to have practice, to be ready for the rehearsal, that there needs to be that respect that you give them of you being on the podium, prepared, ready to teach and ready to cover everything. Because if you aren't prepared, why do they need to be prepared? And
right.
So
absolutely. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter if you teach middle school or if you teach high school or whatever you teach, you need to know that score in and out. And it's not an opportunity for you to sight read on the podium. I mean, it just isn't. And so if you expect excellence from your students, then you too have to be excellent on the podium and prepared. Yep.
What types of advice would you give to first-year teachers, whether that's your experiences as a first-year teacher in Illinois, or your first year at Las Vegas High, or your first year at Green Valley? What are some seminal pieces of advice that you would give to our listeners for those initial first years of teaching?
Right. So my first year in Illinois, I was really fortunate to have an amazing mentor at my school. So it was a middle school that was split into two middle schools. And so I'm just going to say it was not a normal first year, because I mean, I had help throughout the whole way. So my first and most important piece of advice is to ask for help and not to be afraid to ask questions. I think here in Clark County, I used to do workshops for all the new teachers at the beginning of the year, and understand that we have so many new teachers every year because it's such a big district. And I used to say to them, please don't ever be afraid to call me and ask for help or ask a question, and that's fine. But young people are sometimes afraid that we're going to realize that they don't know everything. And the honest truth is, we don't know everything. And so it takes a really secure human being to ask questions. And so that's the most important thing you can do. And to have people come in and help you, and not be afraid to say, hey, what do you think of this? Or how do you think this is going? I think that's the most important thing, like for first year teachers, is to ask for help.
And so you've kind of mentioned, just with everything, asking for help. You've talked about Frank Wickes already. Who are some other people in your life who have been those go-to people for you to ask for help?
Oh my gosh, there's been so many. So, I mean, that's really hard. So I started in Illinois, and the other middle school teacher there was Margene Pappas. She's an amazing educator. She's retired now from Illinois, had wonderful bands. And, if I wanted help or didn't want help, she was going to say, hey, Diane, maybe you should think about this. Or maybe you should think about this. Was really very strong. And I watched her. And honestly, to my last year at teaching high school at Green Valley, I still used many of the things that I learned from her. She was wonderful. She's wonderful. She's retired in Arizona and still working with bands here and there and stuff. So that's really great. I also had a really crusty old music supervisor when I first started in Las Vegas, and he was like, it was such a long time ago. I know people used to smoke, he grew up at University of Michigan. He was a drummer, and he used to come in and he'd say, hey, Diane, you need to be doing this and this. And it was great. Like, I owe him so much. He's passed away. His name was Fred Steinbaugh. but he really helped me so much. And lastly, I'm going to say, I, in the summertime, used to go to conducting workshops all the time. And so for many, many years, I would go to the CBDNA conducting workshop. It was held at University of Colorado. I easily was there 5 years in a row. But when I had the opportunity to work with great conductors nearby here in California, I would work with Tom Lee, or I'd go up to Colorado and work with Alan McMurray. I would do some internships in the summer at music camps with really fine conductors. Alan McMurray, I said Alan, but you know, I think you have to find those people, seek them out. And honestly, here in Nevada, we have 2 universities. Tom Leslie has a really fine program at UNLV, and so I've been able to go and observe there frequently. And Mac McGranahan was at UNR in Reno for 30 years, and I was able to work with him as well. So I feel like you have to go out there and make those opportunities. So I've been the luckiest human being on the face of the earth to find Las Vegas and to make a life here.
The lifeblood of our profession is our students. So talk a little bit about, over your career, how you've stayed connected with students along the way, and how you've established those connections, and kind of how that networking establishes itself over a career.
So the world's different now than it was, obviously, with social media. I never in my life thought I would stay so connected to so many students. And it's wonderful because I get to go see how their programs are going, and they're not afraid to ask for help. And that's so weird, because this week I just received a message from somebody who wanted to know how I would feel about doing some conducting lessons, critiques, and that sort of thing. And I think that's really great. I believe that people gave to me freely help. And so here in Clark County, I have several students that have programs now. And they ask me to come in all the time, and I come in gladly. I would never take anything for that. It's like your babies, you know, watching them. And so that's been a real joy to watch them flourish, and watch, you know, young music educators. What a great job you have watching young people grow into music educators. It must be so gratifying. Yeah, so.
It is, and to see the impact that they have further beyond their own classroom. And that's one of the things I try and prep them for too, is that the impact of the lives of the students in your classroom is going to be far further than anything that we do on the stage. Yes, it's great to have a great performance, but to know that that music is going to impact them much longer than just that one performance, and to see how it connects, and how the world is such a small, interconnected world within the music community is also really fantastic. And so, I'm going
to interrupt you just for a second and say, absolutely, all that is so true. But we also have to remember, and this goes back to excellence, we have to remember those special performances, those really special moments that live on in all of us because they happened. Do you know what I mean? And how do we create those moments so that we carry them with us, you know, forever?
Absolutely. And how do we help our students really codify them and remember them? Because we all do. You're exactly right. We all have those 2 or 3 performances. You know, for me, I have one clearly from high school. Actually, there are 2 from high school and 2 from college that I still remember what it felt like to be sitting in the seat as we cut off on the very last note. And one in particular was probably one of Granger's more obscure pieces, The Power of Rome and the Christian Heart.
Right.
And
wow.
I mean, we finished that, and it's still, I mean, I got goosebumps just thinking about it, you know, because you just remember where you were, how you were sitting, and how it made you feel. And I think, you know, accessing that for our students, I think that's what is so different than any other teacher that they are going to have is that you have these connections with the students that go beyond knowledge, that go beyond feeling, for that matter. And it's much deeper than that. And so how we keep that going and how we establish that, how we allow our students to reflect upon that is going to be really, really important.
But I think it is important to reflect upon that too. Like, acknowledge that happened, acknowledge, and what was it that led up to that happening, and how can we take that into our lives generally?
Absolutely.
So on kind of the topic of students and making those connections and everything, you've been teaching for a long time, and then you still continue to clinic and do honor bands and everything. Is there a change that you've seen in students as recently, and just how you have to shift your leadership on the podium?
So that's an interesting question. And, all through my career, people have asked me that question. Well, how have you seen kids change, and what's different now? But I'm going to be honest and tell you that I think that kids haven't changed. I really think that, I think that students know the difference between right and wrong. And they have more unique toys now than they used to. And they don't play outside as much as they did when I was growing up. But I think as far as those people in front of me every day, I believe that they're the same. And I believe that they understand you if you're clear and you give them a certain goal. I think that when they work hard and something good happens, they know it. And when they don't work hard and something not great happens, they know that too. And I think there's some real basic things that will always be the same. I think the fact that we're different on the podium now is because we're learning more about how to make music. And quite honestly, music is so different now. I think back to me being in high school, and what did we play in high school? We played transcriptions and marches and a couple Al Reed pieces, and God bless Al Reed. Do you know what I mean? But now we are talking about music in such an emotional way. I just don't know that you can ask students to play something with love and then beat them up while they're doing it. That just doesn't even make sense to me. How to
that alignment of I'm just going to call it the emotional content of the piece, the alignment of what they're seeing versus what they're performing. And if there's a dissonance there, it's hard for them to overcome that. Whereas if it's aligned, it's much easier for them to connect and, dig into, for lack of a better term.
Right. And that also goes to making sure that we choose really great literature that has that sort of content. And I don't mean that all music, everything needs to make you cry. I'm talking about music that has depth and that you can study, even if it's a grade 2 piece, that you can bring something out and have an effect on the audience when you play it.
Absolutely. And I would add on to that even that, one of the things that we talk about in our advanced topics course is that, you're going to conduct a piece 4, maybe 5 times in a career, maybe more than that. You will find a piece that is your favorite, and you'll know that it's a great piece that every time you teach it, you're going to find something new. And you're going to teach it completely differently because you're coming at it from a completely different perspective. That's how we know it's great music. And so, and I love that you brought up the idea of there are great grade 2 pieces. There are great grade 1 pieces that will continue to evolve as you evolve as a teacher. But it's on us as music educators to find those pieces and to dig and find those diamonds in the rough.
Right. Not only to find those pieces, but to also find the beauty in those pieces. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can give you a list of really great grade 2 pieces, but can you find the beauty in those pieces? That's really important.
So kind of touching back on the aspects of building a culture. So you had what I'm sure was a super exciting experience of starting at a new school when you moved to Green Valley. can you talk a little bit about your experiences of being a teacher at a brand new school in what I'm sure in the Las Vegas area has probably a very unique demographic? What was the experience like starting a band program there and building up from the ground up?
So I was fortunate enough when I was hired to be hired as the arts department chair. So not only were we building a band program, but we wanted to build a whole arts department. And one of my real big goals was that we would all work together so that we would have projects throughout the year that we did with the choir person, with the orchestra person, with the theater department. And I mean, just to give you an example, we did a full live musical every year, you know what I mean? And everybody worked together on it. But you're right, it was exciting. I'm just going to say that year, the first year we opened Green Valley High School, was the hardest year of my career teaching-wise because you know, you're at a point in your life where you've had some success. And when I mean success, I mean you feel confident as a teacher on the podium. You know what you want as far as what direction you're going. But the students that come to you have come from all different places. And you have to convince, I always say, you know, the hardest thing is to convince a 16-year-old that they should go with you, you know, that they should follow your lead. And it was hard. It was really hard, but our school motto, just to really hammer this home, is commitment to excellence. So when I interviewed for the job, the principal that they had hired was a big jock. And I mean, I love him to death. He's still alive. And like, he was the starting quarterback at BYU and he was there, you know, I mean, it was just, you know, really, and he had been principal at a couple schools. And the first thing I said to him was, you know, I've never seen you at anything. I've never seen you at band festival. I've never seen you at, you know, marching band contests. I've never seen you anywhere. I see you at football games all the time. And I said, if you really are serious about building an arts program, then I really think it's going to be really important that the administration buy in too. And I'm just going to tell you that in all my years at Green Valley High School, 26 years, I had principals at everything. So I think it's important to build a culture throughout the whole school. And, you know, honestly, let's just say, you know, there's that danger of band students at a school being like the school nerds or whatever, but they weren't. If you build a culture of where people really respect the program and are just like, wow, the band, are you from Green Valley High School? Hey, man, that band is really good. Or that choir, you know, they've sung at all these ACDAs and stuff. You know, our orchestra has played at Midwest twice or 3 times now. You know, I think you just need to make sure that it's not only about what you're doing in your classroom, but also that whole high school environment. I think the school environment is really important.
Absolutely. And I think building that, I love that you brought in, you know, building that connection and the communication with administration and always letting, because sometimes the administration might not know what's going on, because especially at larger high schools, you may not have direct connection with the head principal all the time. So always thinking about how do we get that information out? How do we, you know, even if it's once a week, just dropping by the front office and saying, hey, just wanted to let you know about this going on this week. And the same way with your community, because the more the community is aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it and the importance of what you're doing, the more they're going to be there and not just relying, especially for, for our band students and music educators, not just the marching band, but what are you doing to connect with the community outside of that? What are you doing to make sure that they know what's happening and invite them to come see you and get them on campus? I mean, it is a two-way street with that communication. And so I think that's also an important part of that. Those first years is figuring out how do we work as communicators, and how clear are we? How can we communicate, and how can we connect with not only our administration, but our community, our stakeholders, and maybe to some extent that broader community of other directors in the area, the region, the state, and continuing to have that conversation.
Because honestly, and Eric, I don't know if you were in this session. I did a session when I was on campus. It was all about relationships and all the relationships that we need to build. But honestly, if if my band is good, whatever that means, and your band is not, that doesn't make my band better. So we have to be a community where we help each other to grow and to improve as a band community or as a music community, because honestly, it just can't be about competition. It's just, like here in Clark County, we used to be in each other's band rooms a lot. Like, hey, Diane, can you come by, have a night rehearsal, and just tell me what you think? Yeah, is that a bad thing for me to be at the neighboring school? No, it's a really great thing. And so building those relationships is important.
I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think as we all kind of touched on too, the magic of this community of music education, just music in general, is the fact it's such a small community where it's really easy to reach out to other people, regardless of where they are, and whether that's where they are in their life or where they are in the country. It's really easy to reach out to like these great educators and ask for, as you mentioned, to not be afraid to ask for help, because they're really easy to be able to reach out and ask for help. And I encourage that so much to all the listeners, to not be afraid to shoot an email to someone who you look up to in this community. And the worst thing that'll happen is you don't get a response, and on the other hand of that, you get a response and stuff, and you open up this gateway of communication just to a wealth of knowledge that you can continue to use.
So the ABA, the American Bandmasters, we're starting a mentorship program where you can reach out to members of ABA and say, could you listen to this? Or if somebody is within a certain amount of, distance, can you come and hear my band? And I think what we want to do is, we have so many members that are retired and that still love working with bands. And we want it to get out there. Now with this whole COVID-19, we're working on a project to help in that area. But we really hope to get that going by this fall, where there's a place on the ABA website where teachers can come and say, I live in Kansas, and who could I go to ask for some help? And there's several people in Kansas that would be willing to help. So we're trying to make that network more accessible.
And I'm glad you brought up COVID-19, because I think that's something that is current and something that really is not going to go away anytime soon. So, putting on your future seeing glasses, what do you see as the future moving forward for ensembles, and what it might look like, or how to best prepare? What are some of your thoughts on COVID-19?
So I know we were just talking about this before we got started today. And first off, I'm going to say I am so respectful of everybody that's working right now and being creative and trying to find different ways to cope with this pandemic. Obviously, this school year is over. So as we look towards the future, I think school districts are really going to try to start with some semblance of school. At Green Valley, we had a really thriving chamber music program. And I think that's one of the directions that I would look, honestly, right now, is not having 70 people in a classroom, but having people spread out through a facility in any way that you can. And I think one of the things that made our band stronger was the fact that kids participated in this chamber music, and it makes them better players. I have no idea what's going to happen with marching band. My thing is, no matter what happens, we shouldn't lose track of the idea that what we're doing and why we're doing it is more important. So if we can't have 100 people in a class, so be it. But let's still do it. So I think we want to make sure that we can salvage music education in such a way that it's going to be palatable for the community and still entice kids to do it. And then as we're doing it, still finding creative ways to help kids grow.
Absolutely. And I think what I would add to that is that we just have to become our strongest advocates. And so, developing our skills to be able to advocate why we do what we do and the importance of music and how it looks different and how it is different than some of the other disciplines that are also being talked about as we look at, reopening schools. And so I think your idea also of chamber music is huge, is that there's such a large repertoire out there that we can really dig into and develop. And so trying to be creative with how we approach using the facilities that we have to be able to work on those musical skills, but maybe not look at them. And I'll reference something that you said earlier, that we've been doing the same thing the same ways for so many years, and not necessarily routines, but just we've had bands in schools, large bands in schools since the early 1900s, and now all of a sudden we might have to look at it differently. And so that changing of gears is going to be challenging for us. But going back to your original comment, I think I want to highlight that again, is that we can't lose sight of what we teach and how we teach it, and knowing that music is really what we need to focus on, not necessarily always the vehicle by which we experience the music.
That's right. And I'm just going to say that it's so unmusical of me to say this, but I live with an administrator, and the honest truth is those kids have to be somewhere. They have to be in a class. If they're not in a band class, they have to be in front of some other teacher. So I think as long as we're making great arguments for why we should be teaching what we teach, I think people are going to be open to having that.
And just kind of as a final comment and stuff of what we're talking about, is the most important thing is that music doesn't stop during this time, either individually or for your students, for your peers, is continually finding ways to make music happen. And just to not let the fact that we can't sit down in a large ensemble or be together with our peers stop that. Fortunately, we're in a world to where there's a lot of great technology available to help us reach out to friends, to help us share music, to help us listen to music and everything, and just continue to show that to your students as well. It's like music is everywhere. Even though we might be stuck at home, have a concert for your parents or whatever. Just pull out your horn and play whatever you have in your method books or whatever you might be working on, and just continuing to play music. And I think just everything that we've talked about today, with just establishing being a leader, and just the importance that music is in the lives of our students and of our peers and colleagues. It's phenomenal to think about just being a part of such a great community. I'm very excited to see what that next step is once we are back in an ensemble, once we get back to schools. Because I know within this community that there's going to be some really great changes, really great shifts, and some great educators responding to this.
Right. It's going to be really interesting to see the creativity that people bring to this. But, we've seen so many things online already that are just amazing, and teaching kids other skills. So, hey, I'm all in with that. Yeah.
Diane, thank you so much for agreeing to join us for this episode of the podcast and everything. I'm sure our listeners greatly appreciate it. I know I greatly appreciate it. If they want to reach out to you, is there an easy way to reach out to you or contact you if you have any questions?
Sure. So my email is dkoutsulis@gmail.com. And, or they could find me on Facebook or whatever and send me a message. But yeah, it's been my pleasure. And I've just always had such positive experiences with Kansas State, and the students are so great. So congratulations to you and to everybody that's working with these fine young people, because clearly you all are doing a great job. So that's wonderful.
Dr. Payne, you want to take us out?
Absolutely. And we'd like to thank all of our listeners. And again, thank you to Ms. Koutsulis for joining us today. Don't forget, rate us 5 stars. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube. Check us out where all podcasts are available. That's going to be Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all of that. Again, rate us 5 stars, share us, get the word out. We continue to see our growth, and we would love to continue to grow and reach more students to help them survive and thrive music education at the collegiate level. Thanks again, and we will be here for our last podcast featuring Dr. Michael River from Mustang Public Schools in Oklahoma, and we will be talking about educating from the podium. See you all soon, and we'll talk to you later.